The sealed demand reached Sir Reginald Seabrook 3 minutes before Lady Louisa Carden raised her glass to Esther's imagined engagement. Esther saw the note pass from a liveried servant into her cousin's hand beneath the blaze of chandeliers at Atherstone House. Reginald broke the seal with his thumb, read no more than 2 lines, and lost the colour beneath his carefully arranged smile. The paper bore the discreet black edge used by West End creditors who preferred private pressure before public ruin. He folded it once, slipped it inside his waistcoat, and crossed the ballroom directly toward Lady Louisa. Esther stood near a gilded pilaster with Mrs. Henslow at her side and her late mother's ivory-edged dance card hidden inside her reticule. She had carried that card through 11 seasons without allowing anyone to fill its final line. Tonight, after 6 weeks of proper calls from Nicholas Armitage, 8th Duke of Atherstone, hope had become dangerous enough to feel almost visible. Nicholas had never promised marriage. He had not even spoken of an understanding. Yet he had listened to Esther, as though her thoughts mattered, remembered which crowded rooms exhausted her, and once delayed an entire dinner procession because she had noticed an elderly guest left without an arm to lean upon. Esther had permitted herself to believe that attention might one day become intention. She had not announced it. She had not begged for it. Across the room, Lady Louisa accepted something whispered by Reginald, then turned with a smile too bright to be innocent. The orchestra had barely finished the opening figures of a quadrille when she lifted her champagne glass. To the future Duchess of Atherstone, her voice did not need volume. It traveled cleanly across silk, candlelight, and polished marble. Conversation broke apart. Fans paused halfway through their arc. Every face turned first toward Nicholas and then toward Esther. Reginald stepped into the silence before she could move. "My cousin has waited patiently for tonight's announcement," he said. "It'd be unkind to disappoint her before half of Mayfair." A ripple of laughter moved through the guests. Esther felt Mrs. Henslow stiffen beside her. She looked at Nicholas. He stood near the center of the ballroom, motionless beneath the painted ceiling. For one instant, his eyes found hers, and she saw not contempt but alarm. Lady Louisa had converted private regard into public command. Reginald had supplied a false expectation. The room waited to see whether a duke could be maneuvered into marriage. Esther knew Nicholas feared that kind of pressure. She did not yet know how much he feared it. "Your Grace," Lady Louisa said, lowering her glass with practiced concern. Surely no one could blame Miss Seabrook for mistaking 6 weeks of attention. Nicholas's face hardened. Esther watched him reach for the weapon he always used when a room came too near. Wit made cold, courtesy made sharp. "Then the room has mistaken attention for a contract," he said. Reginald smiled. "No one mentioned contracts." "You mentioned an announcement." Nicholas looked at Esther again. A braver man might have crossed the floor and asked what she believed. A kinder man might have refused to answer beneath so many watching eyes. Nicholas chose the swiftest sentence available to restore his control. "There isn't any understanding between Miss Seabrook and me." The words were quiet. They carried farther than the toast. Esther felt them settle beneath her ribs with the clean finality of a locked door. No one laughed now. She could have defended herself. She could have told them she had expected nothing he had not offered. She could have exposed Reginald's lie and Lady Louisa's triumph. Instead, she stepped away from the pilaster and crossed the few yards that separated her from Nicholas. Her spine remained straight. Her hands did not tremble. She curtsied with the exact grace her mother had taught her, when dignity was the only possession no creditor, cousin, or duke could seize. Then your grace needn't fear that I'll ever beg to be chosen. Silence fell over the ballroom. Not polite quiet. Not surprise softened by whispers. Silence. Esther rose and met Nicholas's eyes. His anger vanished. In its place came recognition, then shame. Too late. Miss Seabrook, he said. She turned before he could offer another sentence designed for witnesses. Mrs. Henslow joined her at once. Behind them, one guest whispered Esther's name. Another began to speak and stopped. Esther crossed the ballroom without haste, though each step required more strength than the last. Only after the doors closed behind her did her hand tighten around the reticule, the ivory edge of her mother's dance card pressed against her palm. "Our carriage is being brought round," Mrs. Henslow murmured. "We'll leave immediately." "Yes." Esther's voice remained level. She would not weep in Atherstone House. The side court lay beyond a covered passage where the music weakened into a distant rhythm. Cool May air touched her face. Lamps burned along the stone steps, casting gold across harness, buckles, carriage panels, and blue and silver livery. A coach stood nearest the entrance with the Atherstone gryphon painted upon its door. Esther stopped. "That isn't ours." Mrs. Henslow followed her gaze. "No." A footman opened the carriage door, but he did not bow toward the ladies. He looked instead toward the gate. The coachman did not glance back at the house for instruction. He held the reins ready. Esther's pain sharpened into attention. Sir Reginald emerged from the passage behind them. The folded creditor's demand made a hard line beneath his waistcoat. "Get in," he said. Esther turned. "I won't. Don't create another scene. The first one was yours." Mrs. Henslow stepped closer to Esther. "Our carriage has been called." "This is more suitable," Reginald said. "His Grace has provided it." Esther looked at the motionless coachman, the open door, and the livery that seemed correct until one studied the silver braid too closely. Why would His Grace send a carriage before knowing I intended to leave? Reginald's expression tightened. Because everyone knew how the evening would end. "Did they?" Esther asked. "Or did you?" He caught her above the elbow and pulled her toward the step. Pain flashed through silk and skin. Mrs. Henslow struck his wrist with the handle of her parasol. "Take your hand from her." Reginald did not release Esther. "She's upset. I'm removing her before she damages the family further." Esther planted both feet on the stone. "Release me." "You've cost me enough already." The words escaped him with more truth than he intended. Before Esther could answer, the passage door slammed against the wall. Nicholas came down the steps so quickly that two servants moved aside in alarm. The polished Duke of the ballroom had disappeared. His face held no wit, no controlled distance, no concern for who might be watching. He saw Reginald's hand around Esther's arm and stopped only long enough to say, "Let her go." Reginald turned without releasing her. "This is a family matter." Nicholas crossed the remaining distance. "You made it mine when you laid hands on her beneath my roof." He pulled Reginald's wrist away from Esther in one hard motion and placed himself between them. Esther pressed her free hand over the place above her elbow where pain still pulsed. Nicholas saw the gesture. Something in him broke loose. "Close the gates," he ordered. The false footman leaped onto the carriage step. The driver snapped the reins. The horses surged forward. Nicholas lunged and caught the nearest lamp bracket as the coach passed him. Brass shrieked against wood. A small gryphon finial tore free into his hand. The carriage raced across the court while gate servants struggled with the iron leaves. One wheel cleared the opening, then the other. Hooves struck sparks from the stones, and the blue and silver coach vanished into the Mayfair night. Nicholas stood beneath the lamps, breathing hard, the broken brass creature clenched in his palm. Esther had never seen him lose control. She had imagined such a moment might be frightening. Instead, the frightening thing was that his fury in her defense felt more trustworthy than the calm sentence he had used to wound her. He turned toward her. "Are you hurt?" "Not beyond what I can manage." "Let me send you home." "No." The refusal stopped him as completely as any command. Esther looked toward Mrs. Henslow, who had already summoned their own driver. "I'll leave with my aunt." Nicholas's jaw tightened, but he bowed. "As you wish." Their carriage arrived within minutes. Mrs. Henslow helped Esther inside. Before the door closed, Esther looked back once. Nicholas was no longer watching her. He had opened his hand beneath the lamp. The brass gryphon lay across his palm with its copied features softened by a careless mold. Every genuine Atherstone gryphon faced forward toward the road. This one stared backward. Whatever had happened in the ballroom, the carriage had been prepared before Nicholas spoke. Someone had not merely expected Esther's disgrace. Someone had arranged for it. At 11 the next morning, Nicholas Armitage stood in the drawing room of Mrs. Henslow's Bedford Square house, with the broken brass gryphon in his gloved hand and no confidence that any apology could reach the place his words had wounded. Esther sat near the window in a pale morning gown, her right arm held with careful ease against the chair. Mrs. Henslow occupied the seat beside her. The Dowager Duchess of Atherstone sat opposite in dove-grey silk, ensuring that propriety could not be turned against Esther a second time. Nicholas set his hat upon the table and did not attempt the polished opening he had rehearsed during the journey from Mayfair. I was wrong. Esther's face remained calm. "About the carriage? About you?" His mother lowered her gaze and left him without rescue. Lady Louisa created a spectacle. Sir Reginald lied. The room watched. None of that excuses what I did. I chose the sentence that would restore my control most quickly, and I used your dignity to purchase it. Esther's fingers tightened once against the chair arm. "That is accurate." "I'm sorry. I humiliated you before my guests. I didn't ask what you believed. I didn't give you the courtesy of one honest question." "No, you didn't." She studied him for a long moment. "Did you come because you regret hurting me, Your Grace, or because the false carriage has made the evening dangerous to you?" Nicholas accepted the question without flinching. "Both matters concern me. Only one brings me here to apologize." Silence settled across the room. It was quieter than the ballroom and far more exacting. Esther looked at him as if weighing whether truth had value when it arrived after injury. "I accept that you have named what you did," she said. "I haven't decided what that changes. It changes nothing unless my conduct changes with it." Something moved in her expression. Not forgiveness, attention. Nicholas placed the brass finial on the table between them, then stepped back. In daylight, the creature's flaws were clearer. Its copied features were softened. Its little wings lacked the sharp hand-cut edges of true Atherstone work, and its head turned toward the past rather than the road. "May I bring it nearer?" he asked. Esther nodded. He moved it to the edge of the table and withdrew his hand. She glanced toward Mrs. Henslow, then carefully eased the sleeve above her right elbow. Faint red pressure marks remained where Reginald's fingers had closed over the silk. Mrs. Henslow's mouth hardened. Nicholas looked once, and then forced his gaze back to Esther's face. I can send for a physician. That isn't necessary. The tenderness is already less than it was. I won't argue. Good. Esther lowered the sleeve again and leaned toward the finial. She lifted it in her left hand, turning it toward the window. The face is reversed because whoever made this copied a surface rather than a pattern. Nicholas frowned. Explain. An impression reverses what it takes. If someone pressed wax against an existing gryphon and used that shape without correcting it, the cast would face backward. Her thumb hovered above the rough ridge beneath the creature's body without touching it. And this seam should not be visible. It was poured in 2 halves, then filed quickly. You know Carriage metalwork, enough to recognize poor work. A trace of warmth entered her voice. My father chaired a county turnpike trust. When a coach broke an axle or overturned on a disputed road, he inspected the damage before listening to gentlemen argue over blame. He taught me to notice replaced wood, uneven springs, altered fittings, and the difference between a vehicle built for its owner and one changed afterward. Nicholas looked at her with the uncomfortable realization that 6 weeks of formal calls had taught him what tea she preferred and which crowded rooms exhausted her, but not the full shape of her intelligence. You noticed the carriage before I did, he said. I noticed that the coachman didn't descend when Sir Reginald approached. A ducal servant would have looked toward the house for instruction. That man watched the gate. And you asked why the carriage was waiting before I spoke. Because someone expected me to leave under pressure. She set the finial down. Perhaps someone expected me to enter without resistance. Anger rose in Nicholas, but he did not allow it to become command. I would like to place a watch outside this house. Esther's expression sharpened. A visible guard would tell every caller in Bedford Square that danger follows me. One plain-clothed servant at the corner. He would note unfamiliar carriages and men who linger. He would report to my steward, and every report would be copied to Mrs. Henslow. Esther looked at her aunt. Mrs. Henslow gave one measured nod. On that condition, Esther said. Agreed. Nicholas reached for the finial at the same moment she did. His bare fingertips brushed hers over the cool brass. Esther went still. The touch lasted no more than a breath, but memory and possibility entered it together. Nicholas withdrew first. Wanting was not permission. Esther looked down at the gryphon, then back at him. Something fragile passed between them. It did not repair the ballroom. It only proved that what had existed before the rejection had not been entirely imagined. Nicholas folded his hand behind his back. I'd like your help finding who made the carriage. You have servants, tradesmen, and a solicitor. I have people who may tell a duke what they believe he wishes to hear. You saw what none of us saw. Esther considered him. If I agree, every discovery concerning the carriage is shared with me. No witness is questioned under my name without my consent. You don't use my reputation to force cooperation. And you don't decide that something should be hidden because it might distress me. Agreed. You answered quickly. I should have listened quickly last night. Esther opened her reticule and drew out the old ivory-edged dance card. Its ribbon had faded almost to grey. She opened it only far enough to reveal a line written in a woman's careful hand. My mother gave me this for my first season. Nicholas read the inscription silently. Choose no dance that costs you your self-respect. Esther closed the card before he could see the final blank line. I'll help investigate the carriage. That isn't the same as restoring what stood between us. I understand, do you? Not fully. I hope to. For the first time that morning, her expression softened by the smallest degree. A knock sounded at the drawing-room door. Nicholas's solicitor entered with a narrow mahogany case, sealing wax, and a written custody sheet. With Esther and Mrs. Henslow watching, he recorded the finial's condition, wrapped it in white cloth, placed it inside the case, and pressed his seal across the fastening. Nicholas signed beneath the entry. Esther added her name as witness. The solicitor took the case into his possession and promised to deposit it in his locked office until the next formal examination. Before he could leave, a second servant arrived with a message from Mr. Keene, Nicholas's head coachman. Nicholas opened it only after Esther nodded. He read the short report twice, then handed it directly to her. 3 months earlier, Lady Louisa Carden's second groom had asked whether he might take a wax impression of the Atherstone gryphon. He had claimed it was needed for decorations at Carden House. Esther looked from the message to the sealed mahogany case in the solicitor's hands. Then the carriage wasn't prepared after the ballroom, she said. No, Nicholas answered. Someone began building the lie months before I gave it a voice. This gryphon was copied backward, Mr. Pritchard said before Nicholas's solicitor had fully removed the white cloth. The carriage maker's workshop in Long Acre smelled of varnish, lamp oil, and newly cut ash. Wheels leaned against the walls in orderly rows, and a half-finished landau stood beneath the high windows like the stripped frame of some elegant animal. Esther remained beside Mrs. Henslow, while Nicholas stood opposite the workbench. No one touched the brass finial until the solicitor had shown the wax seals intact, recorded the hour, and opened the narrow mahogany case before them all. Mr. Pritchard lifted the object with a square of clean leather. A proper Atherstone gryphon faces the road, he said. This one faces behind, because the maker took an impression from the finished ornament and cast directly from the reverse. He turned it beneath the daylight. There's the mold seam, and the alloy is poor. Too much soft brass, not enough care. Esther studied the blunt feathers and the uneven ridge beneath the body. The marks above her right elbow had faded to faint shadows since the ball, but she still held that arm with unconscious caution. Nicholas noticed and kept his distance. Could any respectable London maker have produced it? Esther asked. A respectable maker could have, Mr. Pritchard replied. A respectable maker wouldn't have. Why not? Heraldic fittings are ordered through a household, a carriage builder, or an authorized steward. No one wishes to explain why a duke's beast is decorating the wrong coach. Nicholas looked at the copied gryphon. Then whoever commissioned this needed a tradesman willing to take cash and ask nothing, or a workman who knew where such men could be found. Mr. Pritchard glanced toward the rear of the workshop. Tom, come here. A broad-shouldered workman left a bench near the stove and wiped his hands on his apron. He looked uneasy when he recognized Nicholas, then more uneasy when he saw Esther. Nicholas spoke before the man could bow himself into silence. Miss Seabrook will ask the questions. Answer her as you would answer me. Esther felt the weight of that choice. Nicholas had not announced partnership as generosity. He had simply made room for it. Have you seen anyone from Carden House here? She asked. Tom shifted his gaze toward Mr. Pritchard. A groom came 3 months ago. Miss Darkcoat, Carden colours under it. Did he give a name? No, said he was arranging decorations for a summer entertainment. What did he ask? Where a man might get private heraldic work cast without household papers. Who'd take cash? Which yards did plain coaches for gentlemen who didn't want arms painted on the doors? Nicholas became still. Esther did not look at him yet. Did you answer? not proper names. I told him there were job masters in Marylebone who bought old bodies and changed them to order. Said Bell's old place had once supplied plain town coaches to political gentlemen. Bell's old place? Bell retired. Crowther took the business. Then Crowther left London, and a fellow called Vane began running the yard. Did the groom ask whether Atherstone House used that yard? Tom swallowed. Not directly. He asked which nobleman preferred anonymous hires. I said I didn't know, but you had already mentioned political gentlemen. Esther said. Yes, miss. Nicholas's voice remained controlled. Did he ask about a Blacktown coach? Not that day. That day, Esther repeated. Tom looked toward the floor. He came back once, asked whether Bell had sold the broad-bodied black coach with the uneven rear spring. Said he'd seen it before. The workshop seemed to contract around them. Esther turned to Nicholas. Could that have been one of yours? Possibly. He did not protect the answer with vagueness. My secretary used more than 1 yard. Mr. Pritchard set the finial down upon its cloth. Then the groom wasn't merely searching for any carriage. He was tracing one he already recognized. Nicholas's solicitor closed his notebook. We need the ownership history before we accuse anyone of controlling the body. He had brought preliminary records from Bell's former business. Bell had sold the yard operations to Mr. Crowther 2 years earlier, but the transfer did not necessarily include full legal title to every coach standing there. Several bodies had been placed under conditional bills of sale. Payment was made by installments. Until the final balance was settled, Bell retained title even when another jobmaster possessed and hired the vehicle. Crowther had later transferred the running of the yard to Mr. Vane. Whether the Blacktown coach had ever been fully paid for remained uncertain, so Vane may control the yard without owning the carriage, Esther said. Exactly, the solicitor replied, and until we find Bell's original bill, we won't know who has the right to remove it. The finial was wrapped again, placed in the mahogany case, and resealed. The solicitor signed the new custody entry. Esther and Mr. Pritchard witnessed it. When they left Long Acre, Nicholas offered no congratulations on her questioning. He only said, "You heard the distinction Tom tried to hide. He feared the Duke more than he feared the truth. And you," Esther met his eyes, "I fear what powerful men do when they decide truth is inconvenient." Nicholas accepted the blow. Then I'll try not to make myself one of them again. The Marylebone yard stood behind a soot-dark wall near a row of narrower mews. By the time they arrived on the 19th of May, clouds had lowered over London, and the smell of wet timber hung in the air. Mrs. Henslow remained at Esther's side. Nicholas's solicitor accompanied them, while Mr. Keene examined the coach bodies visible beneath the sheds. Mr. Vane received them with the offended courtesy of a man who had decided indignation was safer than surprise. He claimed he knew nothing of Atherstone livery, copied gryphons, or a black coach with an uneven rear spring. Esther watched his hands. They remained steady until she mentioned the Carden groom. Many households send servants to yards, he said. That doesn't make every inquiry criminal. No, Esther replied. Cash paid under a blank ledger line may be more useful. Vane's mouth tightened. A boy of perhaps 14 stood near a stack of harness leather, listening with the alert stillness of someone accustomed to being ignored. Esther had noticed him look toward the rear sheds when she described the gold-headed cane Reginald carried. She waited until Nicholas moved away with Mr. Keene, then asked the boy quietly, "Have you seen a gentleman with such a cane?" The boy glanced at Vane. "Maybe. You won't be questioned alone," Esther said. Mrs. Henslow and the solicitor will remain. His Grace won't use your name without your permission. The boy studied her face, then nodded. He came after dark, tall gentleman, gold head on his cane, tapped it against the wheel while they spoke about blue paint. Who was with him? Mr. Vane. Another man in Carden colours came later. Vane crossed the yard too quickly. The boy invents stories for attention. Nicholas returned, but did not interrupt Esther. What did the gentleman say? She asked. The boy's voice dropped. He said the work had to be finished before the middle of May. Mr. Vane asked about the money still owing. The gentleman said, Carden will answer the balance once it's done. Esther felt every piece shift closer together. Reginald's creditor note, Louisa's groom, the copied gryphon, a black coach already known to Atherstone's private journeys. Nicholas looked at the boy. Would you repeat that before the solicitor tomorrow? Will my name be in the papers? Not from me, Nicholas said, and you won't stand alone. The boy agreed to meet them at 10 the following morning. Nicholas instructed his steward to place no visible guard near the child, only a servant at the street corner, to note anyone who approached. It was not enough. At 10 the next morning, the boy was gone. His pallet in the loft had been emptied. Mr. Vane said no such child had ever been employed there. The corner servant had seen a small figure leave before dawn beside a man in a plain brown coat. On the boy's folded blanket lay 2 bright sovereigns and nothing else. By the 24th of May, the marks on Esther's arm had faded, but the ballroom had not. London had already begun turning the incident into smaller, more convenient stories. Some said Nicholas had been cruel. Others said Esther had misunderstood his attentions. A few spoke of the false carriage, though most preferred the romance of humiliation to the discomfort of danger. Kensington Gardens offered no true privacy, but its broad paths allowed conversation without a drawing-room's walls. Esther walked beside Nicholas beneath young green leaves, while Mrs. Henslow and the Dowager Duchess followed at a proper distance. The morning was mild. Carriages moved along the road beyond the railings, and every time iron wheels struck uneven ground, Esther heard the rhythm before she saw the vehicle. Nicholas had spoken little since they entered the gardens. His silence did not feel empty. It felt chosen. The yard boy may have left of his own will, Esther said. 2 sovereigns would be a fortune to him, or a command disguised as generosity. He wasn't dragged away. The blanket was folded. His clothes were gone. You think he was frightened rather than harmed. I think fear is often enough. Nicholas glanced toward her. You say that as if you know. Esther kept her gaze upon the path. Women are taught early that resistance needn't be broken if it can be made costly. His expression tightened, but he did not answer with reassurance she had not requested. They walked several more steps before he said, There is something I should have told you before we began this inquiry. About the carriage? About why I recognized the trap in that ballroom and still stepped into it. Esther turned her head. Nicholas had removed every trace of wit from his face. Without it, he looked older than 35 and less protected by his title. My father once allowed an engagement rumor to grow around me, he said. I was 19. The lady's father controlled a vote my father wanted. She was encouraged to believe my calls meant marriage. I knew what was happening. I objected in private and obeyed in public. Esther's pace slowed. Nicholas matched it. What happened to her? When the vote was secured, my father withdrew our household from hers. No proposal had been made, so he said no promise had been broken. Society decided she had imagined the rest. And you? I let them. The words came without defense. I told myself I had no authority. In truth, I feared my father more than I valued her dignity. Esther felt the past settle between them, not as excuse, but as pattern. So when Lady Louisa forced an expectation upon you, you saw your father's arrangement. Yes, but you treated me as if I were part of it. Yes. Nicholas looked ahead. I learned to survive a room by controlling it. At Atherstone House, I used that lesson against you. Esther stopped near a stone bench. Mrs. Henslow and the Dowager Duchess halted farther back, close enough to preserve propriety and far enough to grant them the shape of solitude. The worst part wasn't that you rejected me, Esther said. You had every right not to marry me. Nicholas's eyes met hers. I know. The worst part was that you never asked whether I expected you to. The quiet between them sharpened. A breeze lifted the ribbon at Esther's bonnet. Nicholas did not move closer. I cared what your answer would be, he said. That should have made me ask. Instead, it made me afraid to hear it. That isn't a declaration. No. His gaze remained steady. It's an admission. Esther saw how much easier charm would have been for him. He could have praised her courage, condemned Louisa, or promised protection. Instead, he stood before her with nothing polished enough to hide behind. The restraint reached her more deeply than apology had. She opened her reticule and drew out her mother's ivory-edged dance card. Its ribbon had faded to the color of old pearl. Nicholas recognized it, but did not reach for it. Esther opened the card only far enough for him to read the inscription. Choose no dance that costs you your self-respect, he said. My mother wrote it before my first season. Did you obey her? Not always. But I kept the reminder. The final line remained hidden beneath her thumb. My mother knew that society often calls surrender good manners. She wanted me to know the difference. Nicholas looked from the card to Esther's face. I'm beginning to understand it. Understanding isn't the same as changing. No. And remorse isn't proof. No. His agreement contained no impatience. Esther closed the card and returned it to her reticule. Then show me proof where it matters. The Carriage records, all of them. Nicholas drew a breath. There are records that were never entered into the public household books. Esther waited. He continued. For several years, I have used anonymous hired carriages for political meetings, plain bodies, no arms, different yards. My private secretary kept separate memoranda because the men I met wanted discretion. Were any of those meetings connected to Bell's Yard? At least 2. And who knew? My secretary, selected servants, the job masters, the gentleman who travelled with me. Which gentleman? Nicholas hesitated only long enough to remember, not to conceal. Earl Carden attended one meeting last autumn. Esther felt the pieces align. At Bell's Yard, near it. We changed coaches there before continuing to a private house. Was Lady Louisa's groom present? Nicholas's expression changed. Yes. The answer came slowly. He waited with the Earl's carriage. He would have seen the black town coach, the broad-bodied coach with the uneven rear spring. If it was the same one, yes, then he didn't need to discover which carriage belonged to your secret journeys. He had already seen it. Nicholas looked toward the road beyond the trees, as if the memory had altered shape before him. He could have followed the yard's ownership after Bell retired, and asked Tom where private heraldic work could be cast. Then passed the carriage identity to Lady Louisa, who passed it to Reginald, or worked with him directly. Esther began walking again. Nicholas moved beside her. You said these hires weren't publicly recorded, she continued. Would your secretary know whether that black coach was sold? He may. Then the records must be opened. They will be. Not selected for what protects you. All of them. Even if they reveal political meetings you promised to keep private. Nicholas was silent for several steps. Esther heard the question weigh against years of habit. When he answered, his voice had lost its practiced certainty. If the secrecy helped someone imitate my household and endanger you, then I no longer have the right to preserve it untouched. Esther looked at him. He did not appear noble. He appeared afraid, which made the promise more valuable. That may cost you more than an apology, she said. Then it will cost me more. They reached the edge of the Serpentine, where sunlight broke across the water. Nicholas stopped, and for a sustained moment neither looked away. There was no touch between them, no forgiveness. Yet the distance no longer felt like absence. It felt like a boundary both had agreed to respect. A footman approached along the path carrying a folded memorandum. He bowed first to Mrs. Henslow and the Dowager Duchess, then handed it to Nicholas. From your Grace's private secretary. Nicholas opened the paper and read. His face hardened. He passed it to Esther. The memorandum confirmed that a broad-bodied black town coach from Bell's former yard had been hired twice for Atherstone's unrecorded political journeys the previous autumn. 3 weeks before the ball, the same coach had been sold for cash through the Marylebone yard now operated by Mr. Vane. The purchaser's name had been left blank. At the bottom, the secretary had added one further detail. On the night Earl Carden attended the private meeting, his second groom had asked which coach would carry the Duke onward. Esther folded the memorandum carefully. He wasn't merely waiting, she said. Nicholas looked back toward London. No, he was learning. The blue paint had not dried evenly. Esther saw the black beneath it. Before Mr. Vane finished claiming there was no Atherstone carriage in his yard, a narrow crescent of the older color showed below the left door hinge, where fresh paint had shrunk from the metal. She stopped beneath the Marylebone shed and looked from the dark line to the silver border newly brushed along the panel. This coach was black, she said. Mr. Vane's expression did not change quickly enough. Many coaches are repainted, miss. Not all are painted in ducal colors 3 weeks after being sold for cash. Nicholas stood several feet behind her with Mrs. Henslow, his solicitor, and Mr. Keene. He did not move forward to turn her observation into his command. Mr. Keene lifted a lantern toward the undercarriage and crouched near the rear spring. Your Grace, he said, this is the body. Vane gave a short laugh. You can't identify a carriage from one spring. I can identify the replacement my own men paid for last autumn, mister. Keene pointed to a broad iron plate fixed beneath the right rear corner. The original split during His Grace's second hire. Bell's Yard charged Atherstone House for the repair. The plate is wider than it should be, and the left spring sits half an inch lower. Esther walked around the coach. Its wheels had been removed and leaned against the shed wall. Both lamps were missing, but the left bracket remained fixed to the body. 2 empty screw holes and a rough break marked the place where the brass gryphon had torn away in Nicholas's hand. The sight of it carried her back to the side court. Reginald's fingers around her arm. Horses striking sparks. Nicholas, standing beneath the lamps with the broken creature in his palm. She made herself study the fracture rather than the memory. The missing ornament came from here, she said. Nicholas's solicitor examined the bracket without touching it. It is consistent with the break recorded in the sealed case. Consistent isn't identity, Vane said. Not alone, Esther replied. The old black paint, the altered spring, the empty bracket, the blue livery. and the timing together are more difficult to dismiss. Vane looked toward Nicholas. Is this how your grace conducts business now? Through a lady's suspicions. Miss Seabrook has observed more in 10 minutes than you've admitted in 10 days. Nicholas's tone remained quiet. Answer her. Vane's mouth tightened. A gentleman ordered the repainting. He paid in cash. I didn't ask his politics or his courtship plans. His name? Esther asked. He gave none. Then show us the ledger entry. Vane led them into a cramped counting room. The yard book lay open upon a sloping desk. Charges had been entered for paint, silver braid, new lamps, and temporary livery. Where the customer's name should have appeared, the line remained blank. The total had been partly paid. A smaller balance stood beneath it in red ink. Esther read it twice. This is the balance the yard boy heard discussed. The boy invented that tale, Vane said. He vanished after receiving 2 sovereigns. Nicholas replied. That makes payment more likely than invention. It proves nothing about me. Esther looked through the counting room window toward the rear sheds. A man in a dark stable coat moved past the timber stacks, his collar turned high. For one instant, blue and white showed beneath the coat, Carden colors. There, she said. Mr. Keene reached the yard before Nicholas did. But the man had already disappeared into the narrow lane beyond the sheds. Vane blocked the doorway with offended dignity. My workers use whatever coats they own. He wasn't one of your workers, Esther said. You didn't call after him. Vane's glance flicked toward the ledger. That was answer enough. Nicholas's solicitor closed the book before Vane could move it. Who owns this carriage? He asked. The yard does. Which yard? Mine. Bell. Sold the operations to Crowther under several conditional instruments. Crowther later transferred possession to you. We have not found proof that final title to this particular coach passed from Bell. Vane's face hardened. The body stands on my ground. Possession and title aren't always the same. Then fetch Bell and ask him. We intend to. The solicitor looked toward Nicholas. Until the original bill is located. Your Grace cannot lawfully remove the coach, merely because it imitates your livery. Nicholas's anger showed only in the stillness of his shoulders. Can we prevent alteration? We can serve written notice that the carriage is disputed evidence and that any change will be recorded against the yard. We can also station a witness outside the premises. Do it. Vane folded his arms. You'll frighten away my customers. Esther glanced toward the high timber stacks that sealed the rear of the yard from view. A discreet watchman at the front gate needn't trouble anyone. Nicholas heard the precision in her wording. One man, plain coat. He records every carriage entering or leaving. His solicitor began writing. No seizure. No public accusation. No interference with ordinary trade. And no alteration to this body, Nicholas said. Vane's answer came after a pause. I've heard you. That wasn't agreement. It's all you'll get without a magistrate. Nicholas might have used rank to threaten him. Instead, he let the written notice speak. The restraint mattered to Esther because it proved he had understood at least one part of her warning in Kensington Gardens. Truth could not be protected by replacing another man's lawlessness with a duke's convenience. When they left the shed, the late afternoon light caught the false silver paint and made the carriage appear almost respectable. Esther hated it for that. They didn't need anyone to believe it forever, she said, only long enough for me to step inside. Nicholas stopped beside her. Mrs. Henslow and the solicitor had moved ahead toward their waiting carriage. Mr. Keene remained within sight near the gate. You believe the purpose was to make your consent appear visible, Nicholas said. A woman, seen entering a ducal carriage after a public rejection, would supply society with its own conclusion, even if she entered because her cousin forced her. The witnesses would remember the door, the arms, and your presence, not the pressure on your arm. Esther looked back at the empty bracket. That is what frightens me. Not merely being taken somewhere, being made to appear willing. Nicholas's face changed. He did not offer the useless promise that no one would believe such a lie. Then I won't define silence as consent, he said. Not yours, not anyone's. Esther met his eyes. The words did not undo the ballroom where he had defined her before she could speak. That was why they mattered now. They acknowledged the exact shape of the wound. Nicholas lowered one hand between them, palm open but not extended far enough to presume. May I take your hand? The question was quiet. Esther looked at his waiting palm. Reginald had taken her arm as though relationship gave him ownership. Nicholas, who possessed more power than any man in the yard, asked for what he could not claim. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed carefully, warm around hers, without pulling her nearer. For several breaths, they stood in the shadow of the false carriage, joined by a touch Esther had chosen. Nicholas did not thank her. Gratitude would have made the moment sound like a reward. He simply held her hand until she eased her fingers away. The boy's words matter, she said. Carden will answer the balance. Reginald received a creditor's demand before Louisa's toast. You saw it, I saw the note. I recognized the border. Then he may have expected Carden patronage in return for removing me. Nicholas glanced toward the lane where the groom had vanished, or for ensuring Louisa remained the only woman society connected to me. We still need proof. We'll find it. That evening, a liveried man arrived at Bedford Square with no written note. He told Mrs. Henslow's butler that the Duke of Atherstone wished Miss Seabrook to join him after the next performance at King's Theatre the following week. The butler asked for the sealed household token required for any message concerning Esther. The man claimed there had been no time. He refused to give his name and left before the plainclothes watcher at the corner could cross the street. Mrs. Henslow reported the message to Esther at once. Nicholas received a copy within the hour. His reply came in his own hand. He had sent no summons. Someone had found the rule designed to protect Esther and was already testing how fear might make her break it. On the 3rd of June, Esther sat opposite Nicholas inside a genuine Atherstone town carriage, while Mrs. Henslow and Anne occupied the forward-facing seat beside her. Mr. Keene held the reins himself. No ducal arms had been covered, no livery altered, and the left lamp bore the correct forward-facing gryphon. Esther had inspected each detail before entering. Nicholas had not smiled at the caution. He had approved it. Begin at King's Theatre, she said. Then take the route a false driver would choose if he wanted witnesses but not intervention. Mr. Keene touched the horses forward. The carriage rolled away from Haymarket beneath a pale afternoon sky, joining carts, hackneys, and private coaches in the slow press of London traffic. Esther closed her eyes for the first turn. Nicholas watched without interrupting. The wheels passed from smooth paving to a rougher stretch that set the body trembling. A narrow right followed, then a long straight road where the horses gained speed. You remember streets by sound, he said. Esther opened her eyes. By sound, incline, and the way the body answers the road. My father said sight tells you where you are. Motion tells you what the road intends to do next. And what does this road intend? to make a passenger believe she is traveling farther than she is. Mrs. Henslow looked toward the window. We haven't gone far from the theatre. No, but 2 narrow turns and 1 rough crossing make distance feel greater inside a closed compartment. Esther leaned slightly as the carriage turned again. A driver staging an appearance would avoid the broadest streets until the final approach. Too many watchmen, too many household carriages that might recognize false livery. Nicholas glanced toward the road ahead. Then where would he finish? Somewhere reputation does the work for him. She lifted the curtain and watched a row of respectable houses give way to streets where private clubs, gaming rooms, and discreet entrances stood within easy reach of St. James's. A woman needn't enter a notorious house. She need only be seen leaving a duke's carriage before its door. Mrs. Henslow's mouth tightened. After the ballroom, society would decide the rest. Exactly. Esther let the curtain fall. The lie would be simple. Rejected publicly, she pursued him privately. Nicholas's expression hardened at the sentence, but he did not answer with anger. And the witnesses? Chosen people who enjoy remembering what confirms them. A gentleman leaving a club, a woman waiting in her carriage, someone connected to Lady Louisa who can spread concern before suspicion becomes accusation. The carriage entered a narrower passage where the walls drew close on both sides. Wheel noise deepened. The enclosed sound struck Esther with the sudden force of memory. The open false carriage door in the side court. Reginald's hand above her elbow. Blue paint beneath the lamps. For one breath, the air inside the genuine coach felt too small. She placed her gloved fingers against the seat, forcing herself to name what was real. Mrs. Henslow sat beside her. Anne faced the window. Mr. Keene drove. The door was not locked. Nicholas did not move toward her. He placed one hand open upon the space between them, palm upward, close enough to choose and far enough to refuse. Esther looked at it. The gesture carried no question aloud, yet it asked one. She put her hand in his. Nicholas's fingers closed gently around hers. He did not draw her nearer. He merely held on while the carriage passed through the narrow street and returned to open light. Esther's breathing steadied. She kept her hand where it was. There will be one place where the carriage must slow, she said. A congested crossing, a turn too sharp for speed. Somewhere a passenger might force attention if the driver ignored the check string. Nicholas's thumb remained still against her glove. You're planning how to escape. I'm planning how not to depend upon rescue. That doesn't mean you must face danger alone. No, it means help must not replace judgment. Agreed. They continued toward St. James's. Esther counted the intervals between turns and marked them upon a small folded map with her free hand. One crossing near a brewer's yard slowed them almost to a stop, while a dray blocked half the road. She looked through the glass, studying the position of the curb and the distance from the carriage step to the stones. Here, she said, a driver couldn't avoid slowing if traffic were arranged badly enough. Arranged? Mrs. Henslow asked. A paid wagon, a hesitant coachman, 2 vehicles entering at once. 10 minutes could be created without anyone remembering it as unusual. Nicholas looked toward the brewer's dray, and 10 minutes would allow planted witnesses to take their places. Yes, Esther marked the crossing. The carriage turned once more, and the entrance of a private gaming house appeared beyond a row of lamps, respectable in stone and infamous in reputation. There, she said. Mr. Keene drove past without stopping. Nicholas followed Esther's gaze. You believe that is the destination. I believe it is the kind of destination they would choose. Then you shouldn't attend the theatre. Esther withdrew her hand from his. The warmth remained inside her glove. That isn't your decision. Nicholas accepted the correction at once. No, it isn't. If I remain hidden, they learn fear can confine me without a carriage. Then we make attendance safer rather than forbid it. Esther unfolded the map across her knees. No verbal message can alter our arrangements. Any summons must carry a written token known to Mrs. Henslow and your household. Mr. Keene will supervise the genuine carriage. No substitute coachman. No servant enters the theatre box without being named in advance. And if one of us is said to be ill, Mrs. Henslow asked, the message must still be verified. Esther replied, fear is precisely what they will use to make rules seem inconvenient. Nicholas looked at her with an intensity that held admiration and something more dangerous, because it remained unspoken. Your judgment governs the risk, he said, not my title. Esther met his eyes. Then we attend. The carriage returned to Haymarket by the most direct route. Esther did not take Nicholas's hand again, but neither pretended the first holding had meant nothing. 2 nights later, King's Theatre blazed with lamps above the arriving coaches. Esther entered with Mrs. Henslow and Anne. Nicholas occupied the Atherstone box across the house, visible whenever the curtain rose and the audience shifted beneath the chandeliers. Mr. Keene remained outside with the genuine carriage. Every instruction had been written. Every servant had been named. Esther kept her mother's dance card inside her reticule, although there would be no dancing. She carried it because courage, like dignity, sometimes required a tangible reminder. The first act passed without incident. During the interval, the corridors filled with greetings, fans, and the rustle of silk. A gentleman detained Nicholas at the entrance to his box with some political question. Esther turned to speak to her aunt and found Mrs. Henslow's chair empty. Her shawl remained draped across the rail. Her reticule lay upon the seat. Anne had vanished with her. Esther rose so quickly that the opera glass slipped from her lap. At that moment, a footman in exact Atherstone, blue and silver, appeared at the box entrance. His breath came fast, as though he had run. "Miss Seabrook," he said, "your aunt has collapsed in the carriage." Esther stared at him. No written token lay in his hand. No named servant had been assigned to enter the box. Every rule warned her not to follow. Then she looked again at Mrs. Henslow's abandoned shawl and reticule. Fear did what the conspirators had planned. It made caution feel like delay. "Where is she?" Esther asked. "At the side entrance, miss. There isn't time." The footman turned before Esther could demand the written token, as though urgency excused every rule. She followed him into the theatre corridor, but not blindly. "Where is Mr. Keene?" she asked. "With the carriage, miss." "Which entrance?" "The side entrance. Your aunt fainted before she could be carried farther." His answers came too quickly. Esther glanced back toward the Atherstone box across the theatre. Nicholas was still detained by 2 gentlemen near the door. She could not call to him without crossing the crowded interval, and Mrs. Henslow's abandoned shawl and reticule remained behind her like proof of sudden distress. The footman moved down the servants' stair. Esther kept one hand upon the banister and counted each turn. At the lower passage, a theatre attendant opened the outer door. "An older lady was taken this way?" Esther asked him. The man nodded. "With a maid, miss. She looked unwell." That answer was enough to preserve the deception. Esther stepped into the night. A blue and silvered carriage stood beneath the lamps with the Atherstone arms upon its door. The coachman kept his face shadowed by his hat. No Mr. Keene waited beside the horses. No genuine gryphon shone on the left lamp. The bracket was bare. Esther saw it as the footman opened the door. "Where is my aunt?" "Inside, miss." Esther leaned toward the compartment. "Aunt?" Darkness answered. She placed one foot upon the iron step to look farther in. The footman pushed. The door closed behind her. The outer bolt struck metal. The carriage moved before she reached the handle. Esther caught the window strap as the first turn threw her sideways. New blue paint could not hide the smell of old leather and damp timber. Beneath the wheels came the uneven rhythm she had heard in the Marylebone shed. One rear spring answered the road a fraction later than the other. This was the same black coach, the same false carriage Nicholas had ordered watched. Esther pulled the check string. No bell sounded. She pulled again until the cord burned against her glove. The driver did not slow. "Stop the carriage," she called. No answer came from above. She pressed the inner handle. It moved less than an inch, held by the exterior fastening. Panic rose, sharp and immediate, but she forced herself to listen beyond it. Smooth paving, narrow right turn, rough stones, a long straight stretch. The route from King's Theatre toward St. James's. They were following the road she had predicted. That knowledge did not make her safe. It gave her something fear could not take. She opened her parasol and struck its handle against the roof 3 times. The driver shouted at the horses. The carriage accelerated, then turned so sharply that Esther had to brace herself against the opposite seat. Ahead lay the congested crossing near the brewer's yard. If the dray was present, the carriage would have to slow. Esther examined the doorframe in the intermittent streetlight. The wood around the latch bore the damage from the side court escape. The bolt had been fitted hastily above a splintered edge. It held the door closed, but not cleanly. She slid the curved parasol handle between the door and frame, pressed upward beneath the imperfect catch, and pulled the inner handle at the same time. The bolt lifted a fraction. The carriage slowed. Outside, a brewer's dray blocked half the crossing exactly where Esther had expected it. Voices rose as 2 coachmen disputed right of way. She worked the parasol again. The catch slipped. The door opened against the pressure of the moving air. Esther waited until the wheels nearly stopped, gathered her skirt, descended to the step, and lowered herself to the stones. Her right palm scraped the door edge, but she remained upright. The false carriage surged forward the moment the crossing cleared. Esther saw the empty left bracket once, beneath a street lamp, before the coach disappeared toward the darker end of St. James's. She turned and found herself before the private entrance of a notorious gaming house. 3 gentlemen stood beneath the portico. A fashionable woman waited in an open barouche. Another gentleman, whom Esther had seen near Lady Louisa's circle, stepped from the doorway, with a look of surprise too carefully timed to be genuine. "Miss Seabrook," he said, "did you arrive in the Duke of Atherstone's carriage?" Esther wrapped her handkerchief around her scraped palm. "No, I escaped from a counterfeit carriage that carried his arms." The woman in the barouche raised her lorgnette. One gentleman whispered to another. Their eyes did not rest upon Esther's injured hand or the road down which the carriage had fled. They rested upon the gaming house door behind her. A second carriage drew up. Lady Louisa leaned from its window before the wheels had stopped. "Esther," she called, with horror arranged like jewelry upon her face. "What have you done?" Esther met her gaze. "What you intended me to appear to have done." Louisa descended with assistance from her groom. "You are distressed. Come with me before people misunderstand. They were brought here to Misunderstand. That's absurd. Then why did one of your acquaintances ask about the Duke's carriage before he asked whether I was hurt? Louisa's composure tightened. She looked toward the portico, not the road. Hooves struck hard behind them. A genuine Atherstone carriage stopped at the crossing with Mr. Keene on the box. Nicholas stepped down before the footman could open the door. He crossed toward Esther with his face stripped of every public mask. "Mrs. Henslow is safe," he said first. She and Anne were found in the opposite retiring room. Someone told them you had become ill. Relief weakened Esther more than the escape had. Nicholas stopped short of touching her. His eyes moved to the handkerchief around her palm. "Are you injured?" "Only scraped." He looked at the witnesses. "The carriage that brought Miss Seabrook here wasn't mine." One of the gentlemen beneath the portico lifted his brows. "It bore your arms, Your Grace." "Then my arms were stolen." Lady Louisa spoke softly. "Surely this isn't the place to make accusations without proof." Nicholas turned toward her. "No accusation is required to say what I know. My coachman is here. My carriage is here. Miss Seabrook was locked inside another." The gaming house acquaintance gave a skeptical smile. "And where is this other carriage?" "Gone," Esther said. Its left lamp bracket was empty. The finial Nicholas tore from it on the 15th May remains sealed with his solicitor. The use of his name passed between them without tenderness, only shared fact. Nicholas offered his arm. Esther accepted it for the few steps to the genuine carriage. Because Mrs. Henslow waited inside. She released him as soon as she reached the door. He noticed and made no claim upon the gesture. During the journey to Bedford Square, Mrs. Henslow held Esther's bandaged hand while Nicholas sat opposite. "By morning, the papers will have this," he said. "I can prevent the worst accounts from spreading." Esther looked at him. "How?" "Printers can be pressured through patronage, subscriptions, advertisements, and the threat of proceedings. Witnesses can be persuaded not to repeat what they think they saw. They'll still think it, but fewer people will hear it. Silence won't clear my name. It may prevent greater harm before we have proof." Esther heard the old instinct beneath the measured words. "Control the room before the room could wound him. You'd leave the lie intact because truth is slower. I'm trying to protect you. Then don't decide what protection costs me." Nicholas said nothing more before they reached Bedford Square. Near midnight, two political allies came to Atherstone House with an unsigned denial already prepared. It stated that Nicholas had never used anonymous hired carriages and that any coach bearing his arms outside his household had no connection to him. If he signed, the scandal would be smothered. His cabinet consideration would remain untouched. If he refused, both the secret journeys and the woman seen before the gaming house door would become public by morning. On the morning of the 6th June, Nicholas stood in the library at Atherstone House with an unsigned denial before him and two political allies explaining how easily London could be taught to forget. Lord Mowbray rested one hand upon the back of a chair, as though the matter required patience rather than courage. Sir Matthew Wickland had already marked 3 printers who depended upon government advertisements, favourable subscriptions, and protection from expensive proceedings. "No one is asking you to lie about Miss Seabrook," Lord Mowbray said. "Only about your use of anonymous carriages." Nicholas looked at the prepared statement. It declared that he had never employed unmarked hired coaches for political business, and that any carriage bearing Atherstone arms outside his household had no connection to him. The first claim was false. The second was carefully incomplete. "The witnesses outside the gaming house?" he asked. "They can be encouraged to remember uncertainty," Sir Matthew replied. "Subscriptions disappear. Invitations become scarce. A gentleman may discover that repeating gossip costs more than enjoying it." "And the papers?" "One editor can be reminded of a pending libel action. Another values government notices. A third owes Lord Mowbray a favour." Nicholas touched neither the pen nor the statement. "What happens to Miss Seabrook's name?" "Lord Mowbray gave him the answer of a man accustomed to calling erasure mercy. It ceases to appear. That isn't the same as being cleared. Public memory rarely distinguishes between the two." Sir Matthew pushed the pen nearer. "The cabinet consideration remains open if this is settled today. Refuse, and your private meetings become the story. Men who trusted you will deny everything. Miss Seabrook will still be discussed, only beside a larger scandal." Nicholas heard Esther in the carriage the night before. "Do not decide what protection costs me." He dismissed the men without signing. Then he sent a formal request to Bedford Square, asking whether Esther would receive him with Mrs. Henslow present. She chose the hour. When Nicholas arrived, Esther sat beside the drawing-room window with a narrow strip of linen around her right palm. The scrape was not severe, but the bandage made the consequences of his household's stolen appearance impossible to treat as abstract. Mrs. Henslow remained nearby. Nicholas placed the unsigned denial upon the table between them. "This is what they've offered," he said. Esther read the first page in silence. "You would deny the hired carriages." "Yes, and in return, they would pressure printers, subscriptions, witnesses, and patrons until the gaming house story became too inconvenient to repeat. My cabinet consideration would remain." "Have you signed?" "No." "Have you refused?" Nicholas did not pretend certainty he had not yet earned. "Not formally." Esther set the paper down. "Why not?" "Because the political meetings involved other men. Some trusted my discretion. If I disclose the carriage records, they may lose positions or abandon work that matters. And if you sign, what do I lose? The public story may disappear." "That isn't what I asked." Her voice remained quiet. "What do I lose?" Nicholas looked at the bandage around her palm. "The chance to prove what happened publicly." "More than that. I lose the right to say silence wasn't consent. London would be told nothing because a duke made nothing convenient. I'm trying to prevent further injury." "You're still trying to choose which injury I should accept." The words struck without heat because heat was no longer necessary. Nicholas moved one hand toward the space between them, the same open gesture he had offered inside the carriage 2 days earlier. He stopped before crossing half the distance. "Esther, don't mistake hesitation for indifference." She looked at his hand and then at his face. "I don't. Then what do you mistake it for?" "Habit." Nicholas lowered his hand. "That is fair." "No, it's accurate." She rose. "I'm continuing the inquiry without you until you decide whether truth matters only when it protects your future. You'll have every record already gathered. Send copies to Mrs. Henslow." "I will. And don't remove witnesses because you think questioning them may upset me." "I won't." Nicholas wanted to ask when she would see him again. The question would have turned her boundary into something he expected her to soothe. He bowed instead. "I'm sorry." Esther's expression did not soften. "Then make the apology expensive." By the following afternoon, Esther had returned to King's Theatre with Mrs. Henslow, Anne, and Nicholas's solicitor's clerk. She began where fear had broken protocol. The theatre porter remembered the false Atherstone footman entering through the servants' passage before the interval. He had asked which box belonged to Mrs. Henslow, and whether the older lady travelled with a maid. A temporary attendant had then told Mrs. Henslow that Esther had become faint in the opposite retiring room. Anne had accompanied her. The attendant vanished before either woman realized the room was empty. Esther wrote down each interval. The false footman had positioned himself before Mrs. Henslow left the box. The deception had not reacted to Esther's movement. It had arranged it. At the first crossing, a keeper remembered the blue and silver carriage waiting near Pall Mall before the interval ended. At the second, another man confirmed that a brewer's delivery wagon had blocked the street for nearly 10 minutes, despite having no broken wheel or damaged harness. The grey-haired keeper near St. James Moses remembered the empty left lamp bracket. Right side had its little beast, he said. Left side was bare. Esther marked the times upon her route map and saw the design tighten. The witnesses outside the gaming house had arrived before she did. The carriage had left Marylebone unseen, crossed London on a planned schedule, and used the congestion she had predicted. The remaining question was how it had escaped a watched yard. On the 8th of June, Esther returned to the outer lane behind the Marylebone sheds with Mrs. Henslow and the solicitor's clerk. She did not enter Mr. Vane's property. She walked the boundary until timber stacks concealed a narrow mews opening from the street. Fresh wheel marks crossed the mud beneath loose straw. A woman who sold kindling nearby remembered a delivery wagon standing across the front entrance on the theatre night. Odd thing, she said. Nothing was unloaded. The driver kept apologizing until another coach rattled somewhere behind the sheds. Then he moved on. The plain-clothed watchman confirmed that the wagon had blocked his view for 10 minutes. He had seen no blue carriage leave the front gate because it had never used it. Esther returned to Bedford Square with the first complete explanation of the surveillance failure. The next morning, Anne recognized the vanished yard boy outside a small Oxford Road stable, carrying harness leather under one arm. He had not been harmed. Mr. Vane had given him 2 sovereigns and told him to disappear before Atherstone's steward returned. With Mrs. Henslow and the solicitor's clerk present, the boy repeated his account and identified Sir Reginald from across the street outside a coffee room. "That's him," he whispered. "Gold-headed cane." He said Carden would answer the balance. The stable's older clerk had once worked for Bell. He told Esther that Bell had retired to Islington and kept his old conditional bills inside an iron dispatch box because he trusted paper more than memory. If the original bill for the black coach remained there, Bell might still hold legal title. On the 10th of June, copies of Esther's route timings, the rear gate sketch, the boy's statement, and Bell's Islington direction reached Nicholas at Atherstone House. He read every page beside the unsigned denial. Esther had found the route, the hidden exit, the paid delay, the vanished witness, and the man who might lawfully reclaim the carriage. She had done it without ducal influence and without surrendering her name to silence. Nicholas tore the denial in half. He wrote to Lord Mowbray that there would be no suppression, no false statement, and no appointment purchased through Miss Seabrook's continued humiliation. Then he sent his solicitor to Islington before the false carriage could be dismantled. On the 15th of June, Nicholas arrived at Bedford Square in a plain hired carriage with no ducal crest upon the door. He brought his solicitor, the Dowager Duchess, and a leather packet sealed in black wax. There were no flowers, No arrangement had been made for privacy beyond what propriety allowed. Mrs. Henslow sat beside Esther near the drawing-room window, while Nicholas's mother occupied a chair by the hearth and gave her son no shelter from the silence. Esther's right palm had improved enough that the linen wrapping had been replaced by a narrow strip of muslin. Nicholas noticed it, then looked directly at her face. "I've made the refusal formal," he said. "The cabinet consideration is withdrawn." He removed the first document from the packet and placed it on the table without pushing it toward her. The original was delivered on the 12th June. "This is my solicitor's copy." Esther read the signature, date, and final sentence. No condition preserved a future return. No private phrase asked the ministry to reconsider when London became bored. "You did this before coming here?" she said. "Yes, before knowing whether I would resume the inquiry with you." "Yes." Nicholas kept his hands at his sides. "I didn't surrender the appointment to purchase your forgiveness. I refused it because accepting silence would have made me profit from what was done to you." Esther looked at the second document. "And that, my public statement. Read it." Nicholas broke the black seal. His voice remained steady, though the first words stripped him of every defense rank had once provided. He admitted that he had used anonymous hired carriages for private political meetings and had kept the memoranda outside the public household books. He admitted that one black town coach from Bell's former Marylebone yard had carried him twice the previous autumn. He stated that the concealment surrounding those journeys had allowed a servant connected to Carden House to recognize the coach without drawing attention. He admitted that after Esther was seen before the gaming house door, his first response had been to suppress the scandal rather than expose the truth. Then he named the earlier failure. "At my ball, I publicly defined Miss Seabrook without asking what she believed or intended. I chose control over courage. Later, when that choice helped make a lie about her plausible, I again tried to decide what truth she should surrender for my convenience." He lowered the page. "Those are the two failures I need to answer for. I won't bury either beneath explanations." Esther's fingers rested lightly upon the signed withdrawal. Trust doesn't return because a man finally describes how he broke it. "I know. You may still regret the office more than you regret what happened to me. I may regret losing the work. I won't place that regret at your feet. And if your political allies abandon you, then I'll learn which alliances required dishonesty to survive." He opened the packet again and removed a bound set of copied memoranda. "Every anonymous hire, every yard, every private journey my secretary could recover. Nothing has been withheld because a name is inconvenient." Esther did not reach for the records at once. "You understand that I may find something in these pages that damages you further. That is why they are here." The answer carried no performance. Nicholas had not come as a powerful man offering sacrifice. He had come as a man accepting consequence. Esther took the memoranda. "This doesn't restore everything." "I didn't expect it to. Then what do you expect?" "To be judged by what I do after today." A servant announced the arrival of Mr. Bell, and Nicholas's solicitor rose to admit him. Bell entered, carrying a narrow iron dispatch box marked by age and travel. He was a spare, grey-haired man, with the guarded manner of someone who trusted written terms more than gentlemen's assurances. He set the box on a side table, produced a key from his waistcoat, and removed an original conditional bill of sale. "The black town coach was never fully paid," he said. "Crowther took possession when he acquired the yard operations. Vane later took possession from Crowther. Neither paid the final installment due to me. The solicitor spread the document beneath the window light. It named the coach body by maker's number, broad rear plate, and replacement spring. It also stated that legal title remained with Bell until the last payment was received. So Vane controls the yard, Esther said, but Bell still owns the carriage. The shape of it, Bell replied, if the body still exists. Nicholas's solicitor pointed to the final clause. Mr. Bell may reclaim it under witness. We don't need His Grace's title or a private seizure. We need this bill, an inventory, and the owner present. Bell looked toward Nicholas. I'll reclaim my coach. I won't have my name attached to a false ducal carriage or a locked lady. Esther felt the words strike a place she had kept carefully still. Nicholas did not look at her for reaction. He asked Bell about the rear gate instead. Bell confirmed that a narrow mews entrance lay behind the timber stacks. It had once been used to move coach bodies after dark when the front yard was crowded. An old ostler who now worked in the adjoining mews had heard a heavy body rolling through that passage before dawn on 3 mornings since the theatre scandal. The uneven rear spring produced a double beat he remembered from Bell's yard. They haven't dismantled it yet, Esther said. Not completely, Bell answered, but they may be moving parts between sheds. The solicitor began preparing the recovery notice. Mrs. Henslow and the Dowager Duchess moved with Bell toward the writing table to witness his signature. Nicholas remained where he stood, leaving Esther free to end the meeting without another request. She looked at the withdrawal letter, the complete carriage records, and the man who had finally made his apology expensive. Nicholas, she said. He turned. Esther crossed the space between them and placed her arms around him. For one heartbeat, he did not move. His hands remained open at his sides, giving her the full freedom to retreat. Esther held him more firmly. Only then did his arms come around her. The embrace was careful without being distant. She felt the breath leave him against her hair and understood how much restraint the stillness had cost. He did not call the moment forgiveness. He did not ask what it promised. He simply held her for as long as she chose. When Esther stepped back, Nicholas released her at once. His face was unguarded. The inquiry resumes, she said. As equals, as equals. You won't remove me from the recovery because you think the yard is unsuitable. I won't. If there is immediate danger, we decide together unless there is no time to speak. Agreed. Esther opened his copied memoranda beside her route map. One Atherstone entry matched Bell's maker's number. Her sketch of the hidden rear gate matched the ostler's account. The carriage had moved before dawn 3 times, always after the surrounding streets had quieted. The last movement had been heard that morning. Nicholas placed one finger beside the rear shed, marked on her map, careful not to touch her hand. They're preparing to strip it. Then we go before dawn, Esther said. Bell closed the iron dispatch box behind them. Tomorrow, he said, that coach comes out under its true owner's name. Bell's promise to reclaim the coach the next morning proved more difficult than any of them expected. Mr. Vane barred the yard, denied access to Bell's property, and sent a solicitor of his own to challenge the conditional bill. Nicholas refused to answer obstruction with force. For 6 days, his solicitor prepared the recovery notice. Bell swore to the unpaid balance, and 2 neutral tradesmen agreed to witness the inventory. Esther hated the delay, but she understood its necessity. If they took the carriage by ducal authority alone, Reginald and Lady Louisa would call the evidence manufactured. On the 22nd of June, before the first light reached the Marylebone roofs, Bell unlocked the outer gate under the authority of his retained title. Esther entered beside Mrs. Henslow. Nicholas, Mr. Keene, Bell, and the solicitor followed, carrying lanterns and signed papers. The yard appeared deserted, but sound came from the rear shed. Wood scraped against stone. A man muttered. Another answered that the left panel had to be removed before sunrise. Bell crossed the packed earth and struck the shed door with his walking stick. "Open it. That coach is mine." The movement inside stopped. Mr. Vane emerged with his coat unbuttoned and saw the witnesses behind Bell. His face hardened. "You've no right to enter my premises." Bell held up the conditional bill. "You never paid the final installment. You held possession. I retained title. My solicitor's notice was served yesterday. The coach has been altered beyond value. Then you've damaged property that wasn't yours." Vane looked toward Nicholas. Perhaps expecting Rank to speak where law had already spoken, Nicholas remained beside Esther. "Mr. Bell is conducting the recovery," he said. "I'm here as a witness." Bell lifted the bar himself. The rear shed doors opened upon the false carriage. One wheel had been removed. The right lamp was gone. The false blue paint had been scraped from broad patches along the body, exposing the original black beneath. Two workmen stood near a pile of detached trim. Neither met Esther's eyes. She walked toward the left door and stopped before touching it. The interior darkness remained familiar, but it no longer enclosed her. "Open the outer catch," she said. Mr. Keene raised his lantern. A narrow ironed bolt had been fixed above the door handle. Its end rested against the damaged wood where Esther had forced the catch at the crossing. "The bolt can be set from outside," she said. Mr. Keene slid it into place. Esther tested the inner handle. It moved only a fraction. "And the passenger can't release it from within." The solicitor recorded the demonstration. Bell identified the maker's number beneath the rear axle and the broad repair plate named in the conditional bill. Mr. Keene confirmed the uneven spring. Esther pointed to the left lamp bracket, still empty, where the gryphon had broken away. Nicholas's solicitor placed the narrow mahogany case on a clean crate. He showed the seals intact and read the custody entries aloud. The case had remained in his locked office since the Long Acre examination. He broke the seal, lifted the white cloth, and carried the single snapped finial toward the carriage. Esther held the cloth beneath it. She did not insert the brass stem. She placed it beside the fracture. The break aligned exactly. "Record that it was compared but not fitted," she said. "Recorded," the solicitor replied. He returned the finial to the case and resealed it before the carriage inventory continued. Vane stood near his counting room, with anger thinning into calculation. Esther looked through the open doorway and saw several papers scattered across his desk. "Your ledger was neater the last time we came." Vane moved toward the room. Bell blocked him. "Nothing is removed until it is listed." The solicitor entered first. Beneath a stack of invoices lay a narrow commission stub torn from the same stock as the yard ledger. The customer line was blank, but the notes beneath it read, "Black coach, twice hired by A." A strip of dark blue ribbon had been pinned beside a sketch showing silver braid along the panels. The shade matched Atherstone livery. "That isn't proof of who ordered it," Vane said. "No," Esther replied. "It proves the coach was selected because of its connection to Atherstone. The rest will depend upon who paid you." The yard boy stepped into the counting room from behind Mrs. Henslow. He had agreed to attend only after Esther promised that he would not stand alone before Vane or Reginald. His face was pale, but his voice held. Sir Reginald paid him. Vane stared at the boy. You took my money and disappeared. You told me to disappear. You're lying. You gave me 2 sovereigns and said the gentleman with the gold-headed cane didn't want me speaking to the Duke's steward. The solicitor asked the boy to identify the carriage, the desk, and the man who had paid for the repainting. He did so without embellishment. Then he repeated the words he had heard beside the wheel. He said Carden would answer the balance once it was done. Vane looked from the boy to the commission stub. Resistance left him in small, visible stages. The gentleman paid cash, he said. Sir Reginald? Esther asked. Yes. Who selected the coach? A Carden groom, he said. He wanted the black body twice used by Atherstone. He knew the uneven spring and the broad rear plate. Who supplied the ribbon? The same groom. And the gaming house address? Vane closed his eyes briefly. The groom brought it with a list of people expected nearby after the theatre interval. Nicholas said nothing. Esther continued. Did Lady Louisa's name appear? Not in writing. Did the groom say whose instruction he followed? Vane looked toward the yard. He said, My lady wants witnesses who'll believe what they see. The solicitor wrote every word. Vane signed only after Bell threatened to include the concealment of the commission stub in his property claim. Outside, the carriage was listed, piece by piece. The body, wheels, doors, exterior bolt, surviving bracket, false paint, removed lamp, and detached trim entered the inventory. Bell formally reclaimed possession. He then authorized transfer to the stable court at Atherstone House, where the coach would remain sealed pending examination and legal disposition. As Mr. Keene supervised the harnessing, Esther noticed a mounted man watching from across the road. Dark stable coat, Carden colors beneath the collar. The groom, she said. Nicholas turned. The man wheeled his horse and rode south before anyone could reach him. He'll carry news to Lady Louisa, Nicholas said. Good, Esther replied. Let her know the carriage has been found. By late afternoon, the false coach stood beneath guard at Atherstone House. The finial remained separately sealed. Mrs. Henslow had gone with the Dowager Duchess to the morning room when a note arrived from Carden House. Nicholas opened it in Esther's presence and handed it to her without concealment. Lady Louisa denied every accusation and demanded that any examination occur before society witnesses. Her final line read, "A duke may expose a carriage, but he will never expose himself." Esther folded the note. She still believes your secrecy will protect her. Then she hasn't heard about the statement. Not yet. Nicholas looked toward the stable court. When this is finished, may I ask to court you properly? Esther felt the tenderness of the question and the discipline behind it. You may ask after the truth is public. Until then, stand beside me. I will. He did not move closer until the silence had given her room to reconsider. May I kiss you? Esther met his eyes. There was no urgency in them, no claim that sacrifice had earned reward. Yes, she said and stepped toward him. Nicholas touched her cheek lightly before lowering his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle and brief, shaped more by trust than desire. When he drew back, Esther kept one hand against his face. That was your question, she whispered. This is my answer. She rose and kissed him again. Nicholas received the choice without deepening it beyond what she gave. When Esther stepped away, he released her at once. The false carriage stood under seal beyond the windows. For the first time since the ballroom, affection no longer felt like something others could arrange. It belonged entirely to them. By the evening of the 27th of June, the stable court at Atherstone House had been cleared of every carriage except the counterfeit coach and one genuine Atherstone town carriage. The false vehicle stood beneath a fitted canvas cover near the far wall, its doors closed, its wheels secured, and the solicitor's seals fixed across the outer latch. Mr. Keene held the stable court keys and had assigned 2 trusted men to each entrance. No servant connected to Carden House or Sir Reginald had been admitted since the recovery. Esther entered through the covered passage with Mrs. Henslow and found Nicholas waiting beside a long trestle table. He wore dark morning clothes rather than formal evening dress, and the papers before him had already been arranged into 3 neat groups. "I've placed my statement first," he said before Esther reached the table. She stopped. "Before the evidence against Lady Louisa and Sir Reginald, before any accusation against them is heard." Nicholas touched the first sealed packet. "No one will be permitted to believe that their scheme excuses what I did at the ball or what I nearly did afterward." Esther looked at the order written in his hand. His responsibility statement stood above Bell's conditional bill, the carriage maker's report, the route timings, the witness accounts, the commission stub, and Mr. Vane's signed declaration. Nicholas had made the choice before she asked. The change reached her more deeply than another apology could have done. "Then the hearing begins with truth rather than strategy," she said. "Yes, even if Lady Louisa uses your statement against you, she will, and Sir Reginald will claim your political secrecy created the entire accusation." "He may." Nicholas met her eyes. "I'll answer what belongs to me. They'll answer what belongs to them." Mrs. Henslow took the nearest chair while Esther examined the 3 evidence groups. The first established the carriage's identity and legal chain. Bell's original conditional bill named the maker's number, the broad rear plate, and the uneven replacement spring. Mr. Pritchard's report compared genuine Atherstone hardware with the reversed counterfeit gryphon. Mr. Keene's statement identified the former black coach Nicholas had hired twice. "Keep this section brief," Esther said. "1 physical fact from each man. The audience must follow the line without being buried beneath craftsmanship." Nicholas crossed out 2 paragraphs of technical explanation. Bell proves title. Pritchard proves the copied arms. Keene proves the former hire. And the black paint proves alteration. Agreed. The second group established confinement, and the staged route, the exterior bolt, would be demonstrated before witnesses. The theatre porter would identify the false footman's entrance through the servants' passage. The crossing keepers would establish that the coach was positioned before Esther left the box, and that the brewer's dray created an arranged delay. The grey-haired keeper would confirm the missing left finial. Esther added the society woman who had raised her lorgnette outside the gaming house. "She saw the image they designed," Esther said. "She should be asked what she actually witnessed, not what she later believed." "Will she come?" "She accepted because your invitation made refusal conspicuous." That sounds uncomfortably like pressure. It is social pressure, but not coercion. She may decline to speak. Nicholas amended the instruction, so no witness would be compelled to answer beyond personal knowledge. The third group connected Reginald and Carden House to the commission. The yard boy's identification came first. Mr. Vane's signed statement followed. Then, the blank ledger commission stub bearing the words, "Black coach twice hired by A." The Carden blue ribbon sample and silver placement sketch would be displayed beside genuine household livery. The Carden groom had not yet agreed to attend, but Earl Carden, faced with the recovered coach and Mr. Vane's statement had ordered him to present himself. He may deny, Lady Louisa instructed him, Nicholas said. Then the ribbon and witness list still prove access, Esther replied, and if he tells the truth, her denial becomes harder to maintain. We won't need her confession. No, we must not need it. The sentence settled the final shape of the hearing. Evidence would expose the scheme, whether Louisa cried, denied, or remained perfectly composed. Nicholas moved the lamp closer so Esther could read the custody list. The snapped brass finial remained in the narrow mahogany case at his solicitor's office. At 8 the next morning, the solicitor would bring it under seal to Atherstone House. Esther, Mrs. Henslow, Mr. Keene, and Bell would witness the transfer into the library strongbox. The commission's stub and ribbon sample would travel in a separate sealed packet. The false carriage would remain untouched until the 1 July. The finial must never be stored with the carriage, Esther said. It won't be, and no one inserts it before the public examination. Agreed, the stable guard logs every entry. Already ordered. Nicholas handed her the book. Each visit since the 22nd of June had been recorded by name, hour, purpose, and exit time. Nothing had been removed. Nothing had been added. Esther closed the ledger. You have thought of every door. I remembered who taught me to. He did not turn the acknowledgement into praise. It remained simple and exact. By 29th of June, every witness had been confirmed except Lady Louisa, who sent word that she would attend only with her father. Sir Reginald accepted at once and declared that he welcomed the chance to end what he called a campaign of ducal intimidation. The Carden groom would appear under Earl Carden's instruction. At dusk, after the final evidence packet had been sealed in the library strongbox, Mrs. Henslow joined the Dowager Duchess for tea in the adjoining morning room. Esther remained in the open library with Nicholas while servants moved through the corridor beyond. The doors stood wide. Privacy came through lowered voices, not concealment. Esther rested one hand upon her reticule. Nicholas looked toward it. You brought the dance card. I bring it to every occasion that may cost me judgment. Tomorrow isn't a dance. No, it is a room full of people who may prefer performance to truth. She opened the reticule and removed the old ivory-edged card. Its ribbon had faded almost to grey. Nicholas did not reach for it. Why is the final line blank? He asked. Esther looked down at the untouched space beneath the names from her first season. My mother believed the last dance should be chosen after the evening revealed itself, not promised before anyone knew what the room would demand. Did she mean only one evening? I don't think so. Esther traced the edge with her thumb. She wanted one place no one could fill through expectation, gratitude, or fear. Nicholas's gaze rested upon the blank line. I'm glad you never wrote my name there. Esther looked up. Glad? I hadn't earned the place. He stepped nearer, then stopped before closeness became assumption. There is something I have delayed saying because I didn't want love to sound like another argument for forgiveness. Esther felt her heartbeat change. Then say it without asking for anything. Nicholas held her gaze. I love you. No wit softened the declaration. No title protected it. I loved you before I had courage enough to be honest. I loved the way you noticed what everyone else ignored. I loved that you could stand in a room full of certainty and still ask the one question no one wanted answered. And I nearly destroyed what I loved because controlling the room felt safer than trusting you. Esther's fingers tightened around the card. He had not said the words to close the inquiry or hurry her decision. He had said them while the final line remained blank. "Nicholas," she said, "you don't have to answer tonight. Don't retreat after speaking plainly." He became still. Esther placed the dance card back inside her reticule. "I love you too." His breath caught, but he did not move. She stepped closer. "I love the man who opened his records when secrecy would have been easier. I love the man who learned to leave his hand open. But on the 1st July, you must stand beside me and let the facts speak before your title does." "I will." Nicholas offered his hand, palm upward. Esther placed hers in it and threaded their fingers together. They stood that way while the last light faded across the library floor. Love had been named, but nothing had been claimed. Before they parted, the solicitor verified the strong-box seals once more. The finial remained in its mahogany case. The ribbon and commission stub remained in their separate packet. Mr. Keene inspected the carriage seals and took the keys into his own possession. At dawn on the 1st July, the gates of Atherstone House opened. Invited witnesses gathered beneath the stone arcade. Then the canvas was removed, and the false blue and silver carriage rolled slowly into the stable court, with its left lamp bracket empty. Every conversation stopped. At dawn on the 1st of July, the false blue and silver carriage rolled into the stable court of Atherstone House, with its left lamp bracket empty and its copied gryphon facing backward. Conversation stopped beneath the stone arcade. The invited gathering included tradesmen, servants, legal witnesses, several members of society who had repeated the gaming house story. Earl Carden, with Lady Louisa upon his arm, and Sir Reginald Seabrook carrying the same gold-headed cane the yard boy had described. This was not a court of law. No verdict could be issued beneath Nicholas's roof. Yet, every person present had been brought to see what rumour had concealed. Esther entered with Mrs. Henslow and took her place beside the evidence table. Nicholas stood before the carriage with his signed statement in hand. He did not begin by accusing Louisa or Reginald. "Before anyone hears what was done through my name," he said, "you'll hear what I did with it." His voice carried across the paving without performance. He admitted that he had used anonymous hired coaches for political meetings and kept those journeys outside the public household books. He admitted that the Blacktown coach before them had carried him twice the previous autumn. He admitted that secrecy surrounding those journeys allowed another household to identify the coach without ordinary scrutiny. Then he named the 2 failures that belonged only to him. "At my ball, I publicly defined Miss Seabrook without asking what she believed or intended. After she was displayed before a gaming house door, I considered suppressing the truth to preserve my political future. I refused that bargain and withdrew from cabinet consideration, but the first instinct was mine. Rank doesn't excuse it." Lady Louisa's expression remained composed. Sir Reginald tapped his cane once against the stones. Nicholas lowered the statement and stepped back. Esther moved into the space he left. "My name isn't restored because the Duke of Atherstone loves me," she said. "Affection isn't evidence. Rank isn't evidence. What happened must remain true, even if His Grace and I never speak again." She turned toward Bell. He presented the original conditional bill of sale from his iron dispatch box. The document named the carriage by maker's number, broad rear repair plate, and uneven replacement spring. It also stated that legal title remained with Bell until the final installment had been paid. "The balance was never settled," Bell said. "Crowther held possession. Vane later held possession. The coach remained mine." Mr. Keene raised a lantern beneath the rear body and identified the broad iron plate Atherstone house had paid to repair after Nicholas's second anonymous hire. He pressed the left spring and showed how it answered later than the right. A workman scraped a loosened edge of blue paint under the solicitor's direction. Black appeared beneath it. This was not an Atherstone carriage, Esther said. It was a former hired coach altered to resemble one. Mr. Pritchard placed a genuine Atherstone lamp ornament beside the counterfeit gryphon still attached to the right bracket. The authentic creature faced forward toward the road. Its feathers had been sharpened by hand. The false one faced backward and carried the rough seam of a hurried mold. An impression reverses the figure, he explained. Someone copied an original without an authorized pattern. The solicitor then opened the carriage door. Mr. Keene slid the narrow exterior bolt into place. Esther tested the inner handle. It moved less than an inch. A passenger could be locked inside by a servant standing outside, she said. That is how I was confined after leaving King's Theatre. The theatre porter testified that a false Atherstone footman had entered through the servants' passage before the interval, and asked which box belonged to Mrs. Henslow. He had also asked whether she travelled with a maid, the first crossing keeper, confirmed that the blue and silver coach had been positioned near Pall Mall before Esther left the theatre. The second remembered a brewer's wagon, blocking the road for nearly 10 minutes, despite having neither damaged wheel nor broken harness. The grey-haired keeper from St. James's described the empty left lamp bracket. The right side had its beast, he said. The left was bare. The fashionable woman who had raised her lorgnette outside the gaming house stood beneath the arcade with visible discomfort. Esther asked only one question. What did you actually see? The woman lowered her eyes. I saw you standing near the entrance after a carriage bearing Atherstone arms drove away. Did you see me enter that carriage willingly? No. Did you see me enter the house? No. Did you see His Grace with me? No. The woman drew a breath. I saw the image someone had arranged. I supplied the story myself. Her admission moved through the witnesses more powerfully than denial would have done. Esther turned to the third group of evidence. The yard boy stepped forward with Mrs. Henslow, close enough for him to see her. He identified the false carriage, Mr. Vane, and Sir Reginald. That's the gentleman who paid for the blue paint, he said. He tapped the gold head of his cane against the wheel while they spoke about the balance. Reginald's hand tightened around the cane. A boy who accepted money to disappear can be paid to return. Mr. Vane paid me to go, the boy answered. He said you didn't want me speaking to the Duke's steward. Mr. Vane's signed declaration was read next. It stated that Reginald had paid cash for the repainting and left the customer line blank. The solicitor broke the seal on a separate evidence packet and displayed the torn commission stub. Beneath the empty customer space appeared the words "Black Coach, twice hired by A," a ribbon sample of dark Atherstone blue, and a sketch of silver placement had been pinned to it. Sir Reginald gave a contemptuous laugh. I never chose any gaming house address. The solicitor looked up. No one has yet asked you about the destination, Sir Reginald. The cane stopped tapping. The moment alone did not prove the conspiracy, but it exposed knowledge. Reginald had been too eager to deny. Earl Carden's second groom was called forward. He stood without household livery and looked once toward Lady Louisa before speaking. He admitted that he had seen the black coach while waiting outside Bell's Yard during Earl Carden's private political meeting. Months later, under Lady Louisa's instruction, he asked Long Acre workmen where heraldic ornaments could be copied and traced the same coach after the yard changed hands. He delivered the blue ribbon, silver placement sketch, St. James's address, and a list of people likely to be near the private entrance after the theatre interval. "Who instructed you to select those witnesses?" Esther asked. The groom swallowed. "Lady Louisa." Louisa's father turned toward her. She did not look at him. "And who told you Sir Reginald would pay the yard?" "Lady Louisa said he'd handle the cash. She said Carden House would make good any balance if the plan succeeded." Reginald stepped forward. "She used me." Louisa's composure finally cracked. "You were drowning in debt before I spoke to you. You promised patronage, and you promised Esther would be removed from Nicholas's consideration." Esther heard the accusation pass between them and understood that neither had mistaken the other's purpose. They had only expected shared guilt to remain hidden. Nicholas's solicitor brought the narrow mahogany case from the library strongbox. He showed the wax seals intact, read the custody entries from the 16th of May onward, and opened it before the gathering. The single snapped brass finial lay inside its white cloth. Esther lifted it by the cloth and carried it to the empty left bracket. She placed the broken stem into the fracture. The edges met exactly. Even the twisted grain of the brass became continuous. No explanation was needed. The object Nicholas had torn from the fleeing coach on the night of the ball belonged to the same carriage that had later locked Esther inside and delivered her to St. James's. Earl Carden removed Lady Louisa's hand from his arm. "You'll leave London today," he said. "I'll neither defend nor conceal this." Louisa looked toward Nicholas, perhaps expecting him to soften what her father had said. Nicholas remained beside Esther and gave her no refuge. The solicitor announced that Bell would pursue his claims for damage and fraudulent use of the coach. That information concerning the unlawful restraint and conspiracy would be laid before a magistrate, and that Esther retained the right to bring a civil action for false imprisonment. Sir Reginald's face changed when creditors were mentioned. The debt he had tried to solve through Esther's disgrace would now become public under his own name. Esther turned to the witnesses beneath the arcade. "I don't ask you to admire me," she said. "I ask you to stop repeating a lie disproved before you." The woman with the lorgnette stepped forward first. "I was wrong." A gentleman from the gaming house portico followed. Then another. The acknowledgements were not applause. They were better. They were better. They were accountability. After the gathering dispersed, the finial was returned to its mahogany case and resealed. The carriage remained under guard pending legal disposition. Mrs. Henslow waited within sight, while Nicholas approached Esther in the quiet stable court. "Miss Seabrook," he said, "may I court you properly?" Esther looked at the man who had once allowed a ballroom to answer for her. This time he asked where no audience could decide. "Yes," she said, "you may." She offered her hand. Nicholas took it lightly and paused. "May I?" Esther nodded. He bent and kissed her knuckles with tenderness rather than possession. When he straightened, she kept her hand in his for one breath longer. Behind them stood the carriage others had used to manufacture her consent. Between them rested a choice no one else had made. The first public correction appeared 3 days after the stable court gathering. It stated that Miss Esther Seabrook had been carried against her will in a counterfeit Atherstone coach, had escaped through her own action, and had never entered the gaming house before which she had been deliberately displayed. 2 more papers repeated the facts after witnesses withdrew their earlier accounts. The woman with the lorgnette allowed her name to appear beneath a brief admission that she had mistaken a staged image for consent. Sir Reginald was required to answer information laid before a magistrate, and Bell began separate proceedings over the fraudulent alteration of his carriage. Once Reginald's debts became public, his creditors called their notes. The gold-headed cane disappeared from Mayfair before its owner did. Lady Louisa returned to the Carden estate under her father's authority and was not presented during the following season. Nicholas did not recover the cabinet consideration he had surrendered. He never asked Esther to call that loss noble. When a political acquaintance suggested that discretion might restore his prospects, Nicholas replied that any office worth accepting would survive the truth about how he had once misused silence. His proper courtship began on the second Tuesday of July. He arrived at Bedford Square with the Dowager Duchess, remained exactly as long as courtesy allowed, and asked whether Esther wished to walk in Russell Square later that week. He did not assume the answer. Esther said yes. That pattern continued through the summer. Nicholas asked before altering an arrangement that concerned her time, safety, or name. Esther sometimes agreed and sometimes did not. He learned that respect was not proven by receiving the answer he preferred. She learned that accepting care did not require surrendering judgment. Their affection grew in ordinary spaces after extraordinary danger. A shared smile over Mrs. Henslow's stern tea. A quiet exchange of notes about carriage routes. Nicholas listening while Esther corrected a household rule without turning the correction into praise. Esther noticing when he abandoned a polished answer and gave her the honest one instead. With Mrs. Henslow's help, Esther prepared a short printed memorandum titled Directions for Verifying a Hired Carriage. It advised households to confirm written tokens, inspect livery and hardware, question unexpected changes of driver, and notice when fear was being used to make ordinary safeguards seem inconvenient. An informal subscription circle of respectable London families paid for the printing. Esther's name appeared on the first page. Nicholas adopted the procedures at Atherstone House, but refused to place ducal ownership over the work. "It's yours," he told her, when his steward suggested calling it an Atherstone household system. "Then your house may use it," Esther replied, "but it won't disappear beneath your crest." Agreed. By August, several households had requested copies, and Esther began receiving private consultations arranged through Mrs. Henslow. The knowledge forced upon her by danger had become knowledge she could offer by choice. Nicholas proposed in early September in Mrs. Henslow's drawing room. The doors remained open, and the Dowager Duchess waited in the adjoining chamber. There were no hidden musicians, no audience prepared to applaud, and no flowers arranged to instruct Esther what she ought to feel. Nicholas stood before her with his composure visibly imperfect. He opened one hand between them, palm upward, but did not reach. "I love you," he said. "I want a life in which I keep earning your trust, not one in which marriage allows me to assume it. Will you marry me?" Esther looked at the open hand. Once, powerful men had treated her presence as permission. Nicholas now offered choice, even when hope made waiting difficult. She placed her hand in his. "Yes." Relief crossed his face, but Esther was not finished. "I'll marry you because I love you, Nicholas. Not because you restored my name. Not because you're a duke, because I know what you choose when truth costs you something." His fingers closed gently around hers. "I won't promise never to fail. Good. I wouldn't believe you. I'll promise not to hide the failure. Esther smiled. That I believe. She opened her arms. Nicholas stepped into them only then. The embrace held none of the grief that had filled Bedford Square in June. Esther rested her cheek against his shoulder and felt his breath leave in a quiet laugh. When she lifted her face, he waited. "You may kiss me," she said. "I was trying not to ask for everything in one morning." "Then don't waste the permission." He kissed her with warmth and restraint. Esther returned it freely, one hand against his cheek, and kept his fingers linked with hers after they parted. Their marriage settlement was completed before the banns began. Esther's separate property remained protected. Her private correspondence and personal papers remained under terms she approved. Any income from her consultations or printed guidance belonged to her. Nicholas's solicitor drafted the first version. Esther corrected it. Nicholas read every alteration and signed the final document without attempting to soften its protections. The banns were read on 3 Sundays. On the 30th September 1817, Esther Seabrook married Nicholas Armitage in a London parish church with Mrs. Henslow beside her and the Dowager Duchess openly weeping into a lace handkerchief. The ceremony was quiet. The promises were not. When Nicholas placed the ring upon Esther's finger, he did not close his hand around hers until she turned her palm and held him back. They made Atherstone House their principal London home during the political season. Esther did not vanish beneath a new title. Household messages were recorded under rules she had helped create. Servants could question an unusual order without punishment. Nicholas returned to political work without the office he had once expected, and discovered that influence exercised honestly was slower, narrower, and more durable than power protected by silence. On the 15th of May 1818, 1 year after the Rejection, Atherstone House opened its ballroom for a smaller gathering. The chandeliers burned above the same polished floor. Music rose from the same gallery. No one raised a glass to arrange Esther's future, and Nicholas made no announcement asking the room to witness his happiness. He crossed to where she stood beside Mrs. Henslow and bowed. "Your Grace," Esther said, although her eyes smiled first. "Your Grace," he replied, "do you have one dance free?" Esther opened her reticule and drew out her mother's ivory-edged dance card. Its faded ribbon lay across her glove. The old names remained. Beneath them, the final line was still blank. Nicholas saw it and became very still. "You kept it open," he said. "I kept it mine." Esther took the small pencil attached to the card and wrote one name upon the final line. Nicholas. The letters were clear and unhurried. She closed the pencil, looked up, and said, "This one is chosen." Then she offered her hand. Nicholas waited until she placed it in his. They entered the dance together. The ballroom did not fall silent. Conversation continued. Silk moved. Music carried them through the figures while Nicholas remained beside her, neither pulling ahead nor turning partnership into display. After the dance, they stepped into the quiet passage beyond the ballroom. Esther returned the card safely to her reticule. Nicholas touched no part of her until she lifted one hand to his face. "I love you," he said. "I know," she answered, then smiled. "And I love you." Esther drew him down and kissed him before he could ask. When they returned to the music, her mother's dance card rested close to her heart, its final line filled by her own hand, while the man she had chosen walked beside her.